Oh, hi, class. It's my project, Grief and Older Adults, and how to help them with grief and complicated grief in in older adults is a subtitle. And yeah, it's my project, and uh, here we go. Um, it's a little slow. I don't know. My computer's having trouble. There we go. All right. Okay, grief and older adults. This is just like a general scope. I just like to start with like the basics, such as like the older adult having certain resources to overcome grief, like financial stability, housing, insurance coverage, for counseling, medication, and medical expenses, and transportation, because that could be a big thing, getting back and forth, and just so they're okay, and have some kind of stability. That way, they can focus on the grief work and all that other stuff, and yeah, and just having the basics met can alleviate just like a lot of stress without worrying. If they don't have housing or if they're not able to get to appointments and things like that, that could be a big deal. So having all that secure and solidified and all that stuff would be good and helpful. Complicated grief can occur when there are many stressors associated with the grieving process, just like unexpected expenses and things like that, and just the whole shift about just if they're like if they were dependent on on an income, and now the person's deceased, and now they have to do everything on their own. It could definitely be like a big change, learning curve, and things like that. And okay, grief. Another slide for the general scope. Just knowing there's help out there is the big thing, because sometimes people aren't aware of services and different things that could help them out, um, to ease the stress, and especially if they're like an immigrant from another country or don't know the language too well, um, that they could be like at a real disadvantage, not being even sure what's out there, what's available. So as a counselor, just being culturally aware and just knowing the needs and even just the beliefs and understanding like their culture of the client can give the social worker insight on how to approach and best assist them. So that's a good skill and an awareness to have. Grief can affect anyone. However, according to some literature, females are affected more strongly than males, especially elderly females, and I think it has to do a lot with the financial stability and resources of maybe not as much these days where both genders work, and it's more equal, but like say like 20, 30 years back, usually like the breadwinner would be the male. So that could be like a transition when that no longer is available in terms of financial stability. And um, and this is why spreading awareness with the adult population regarding supports is crucial in a recovery, because there could be stigma attached to wanting to seek help, and it's good to get the client to feel like it's normal to want to seek help and even to express emotions and to grieve, and just to allow them to have permission to do so, because sometimes people don't allow themselves to feel. Sometimes they become numb to what's going on, and they don't have the adequate supports or the encouragement to keep going or to seek help, and things like that. And next slide. Grief and adults. So I label this meat and potatoes, kind of like the gist, or like the uh, the meat and potatoes, I guess the ham and the cheese and whatever, just to kind of change it up and just make it more creative and interesting. But anyway, back to the the grief. And the grieving process can be a long and difficult journey, but there are effective methods that can help with having good support, like such as a lot of research and studies show, like what's pretty obvious, just having network and support from family and friends and things like that. Just to have people to lean on and have someone to call and things like that. And some literature considers a 12-month period a normal grieving time on average. But then again, some studies say that there's not really a set time, as everyone has their own way of dealing with things. And it's not a one size fits all. And especially if complicated grief could set in after, if certain needs aren't met after a while, which can make the grief process even more stressful if there's other things like transportation worries or not knowing, if they're going to be able to afford food or rent on top of whatever else they're going through, et cetera, et cetera. And also in studies, things like journaling can be helpful, where studies consistently show that detailed verbalization of thoughts and feelings, and to like just to really feel them from a traumatizing event, can have significant health benefits compared to just a mundane, less enthused response. So one thing I learned about healing and just like self development is like you have to like, feel it. I mean, to heal, you have to feel. You have to kind of like learn to like just feel out the emotions that come up and process them, or else they kind of stay stuck or they express themselves in unconscious ways, and that's sometimes when we could get into trouble with that, and especially if we suppress them for a while. And okay, more meat and potatoes. Okay, literature and research on the subject shows cognitive behavioral theory can help with the grieving process, specifically modified approaches, as everyone's different and everyone might like to do things differently. One person might like to talk, one person might like to draw, journal, sing even, or do like whatever expression they feel would work for them in terms of healing. And there's also studies that support different techniques like journaling, like we said, expressions like poetry, songwriting can help express different emotions. And if someone's already like attuned to writing, like poetry, maybe just the transition into doing it with expressing their feelings with grief can just be a more normal, like easier transition. Um, Versus if they were gonna like sing or songwrite or do other like talking therapy, if they're not really much of a talker, they like to maybe written communications better for them, or just other creative, maybe painting and things like that. So it's good to just be open to all. So it's usually the best is just a combination of just like a holistic approach with different amounts of different things like written journaling, singing, not singing, like songwriting maybe, um, and yeah, things like that, talk therapy and so forth. Role playing different scenarios with clients can regarding the disease can also help to express and explore unconscious or irrational beliefs regarding the death of someone, especially if like you feel like in a way you were guilty of it. Maybe someone got into an accident and you think back and you're like, oh, I should have told them to wear a seatbelt, and now you feel really guilty because something happened, or you weren't hard enough on them on their diet, and they just and they have heart issues and something happened. So just like exploring irrational beliefs and unconscious thoughts, through talk therapy and writing or whatever else, what other expressions you feel would work, just to get it out, acknowledge it, and yeah, just bring it to a more conscious level so at least you're aware. And let me see. Also, thought process of acknowledging, like we mentioned before, accepting and expressing other forms of emotion regarding loss can assist in the grieving process. Cognitive and other theory limitations, whether it's behavior, collaborative, or any other thing, even like psychoanalysts, where you go into people's unconscious and kind of really explore that. it can be difficult. I mean, the difficulties can be like the client's just general health and maybe their will to get to want to deal with and do the grief work. If they're older in their 70s, their 80s, sometimes they're like, yeah, what am I gonna do now? I don't have like, too much left. Like I remember with my aunt, like her husband passed away, but she was like in her 80s, 90s, so she was just like, I'm just gonna hang out, watch TV. But to each their own, and it depends like what you want to get out of life and what you feel like you need to do to get better. So, everyone's different. Um, Let me see. Sometimes old age, lack of willpower. And yeah, from experience, a client or anyone in general, whether it's addiction or anything, like they have to want it, is like a big thing I learned in my life. It's like you have to want to change, and then even then, with all the things that you have to do on top of it, like it's hard enough. So if you don't want it, or you're kind of like wishy-washy with it, then it's almost like you're never gonna really get any like significant progress in doing that. So yeah, you have to want it, and yeah, have a clear intention, and then having a team around you, support, encouragement, all that good stuff can help too. Um, Grief, therapy expectations. In a therapeutic setting, the therapist should be trained in grief work and aware of the stages and techniques used to alleviate it, because there are many models and theories with the stages of grief work about like what comes first, like denial, acceptance, grief, anger, despair. And there's a few models out there and theories, so it's good to just be well aware of them. That way, it's just you have an idea of what to expect and how maybe to progress with the client if you have them as a clinician and you're working with them one on one with grief, or maybe just if they have a therapist and you're just kind of like their caseworker and you're observing what's going on. At least you have an idea of how things progress, and you have a you have a clue of what's going on and how maybe the client should be progressing or not. Just so you just have a little bit more insight and things like that. One example of grieving strategy, like I mentioned before, can be denial at first, intense longing for the person, anger, depression, acceptance, and then sometimes eventually a reflective gratitude for the person in the later stages of recovery. After you just maybe are done dealing with the sadness, you just kind of remember the good times and maybe focus on that more. Some studies kind of showed that after a while, like people just rather focus on the good after a while instead of just what was, and in terms of being negative and sad. So yeah, I guess it's just a part of the process and the journey. Next, the therapist should set boundaries and expectations with what the client can expect and what the client is looking to achieve in a treatment process. That way, everyone's on the same page. You know what's kind of what's going on in terms of like where they're at and what they want, and then you could go and help them from there. Let me see. Okay, then the therapist would need to be skilled at being able to use and try various techniques to help client through the grief that client can be comfortable with. Some clients might not open up right away. Sometimes you need to probe a little bit. Sometimes you need to ask questions, start delicately, slowly, kind of just get the ball rolling. So see where they're at, see what they're comfortable talking about, and kind of meet meet them where they are at. And sometimes you could push and motivate and bring up things just to see if see what works, see what they'll react to, see what's helpful, and yeah. And next slide. Concluding remarks. Okay. Um, Validating the client's feelings, being reassuring, and knowing when to transition to the next steps of a given technique process, such as role playing and working through difficult emotions, and knowing when to transition to a different maybe task if it's too much for the client, and change it up to another subject. if the client has too much to deal with, and